My husband died 10 years ago. Every month I transferred $500 to pay off his debts. But one day, I never questioned it, not really. Grief has a way of narrowing your world until duty feels like love and sacrifice feels like loyalty. When my husband died 10 years ago, everything else faded into the background. The house felt too quiet. The nights felt endless. And in the middle of all that silence, one responsibility anchored me: his debts. That was what I was told he left behind. Not memories. Not unfinished dreams. Debts. I remember sitting at the small kitchen table just weeks after the funeral, staring at a folder filled with papers I barely understood. Numbers, account names, balances. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was still sleeping in his old shirts. Still setting aside his favorite mug in the morning. When someone said, "These need to be taken care of," I nodded without asking questions. It felt like the last thing I could do for him. So I set up a monthly transfer. $500. Every month. Same date. Same amount. I told myself it was temporary. A year, maybe 2. But grief doesn't move in straight lines, and neither did time. The months turned into years. I built my life around that payment. I skipped vacations. I learned to say no. I stayed in a smaller apartment than I could afford. I didn't remarry. I didn't even date seriously. Part of me felt like I didn't deserve happiness while I was still fixing what he had left behind. Every month, when the confirmation email arrived, I felt a strange mix of pain and purpose. Pain, because it reminded me he's gone. Purpose, because it made me feel like I was still connected to him. Like I was still his wife in some meaningful way. Friends would ask why I lived so modestly. I'd smile and say, "I'm managing some things from the past." I never explained. It felt private. Sacred, almost. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered how much was left. But I never checked. I was afraid that if I looked too closely, I'd have to confront something I wasn't ready for, either that I was almost done, or that it would never end. So I kept paying. Year 3. Year 5. Year 8. By year 10, the payment had become automatic in every sense of the word. I didn't think about it anymore. It was just part of my life, like rent or electricity. Something that existed quietly in the background. Until one ordinary afternoon shattered everything I thought I knew. It started with a letter. Not dramatic. Not urgent. Just an envelope with a logo I didn't recognize, sitting among grocery flyers and utility bills. I almost threw it away unopened. Almost. Inside was a brief notice asking me to contact them regarding an account associated with my late husband's name. My heart dropped. 10 years later, and something was still unfinished. I called the number immediately. The woman on the line was polite, professional. She asked for details. Dates. My husband's full name. When he passed. I answered automatically, the way you do when you've repeated a story so many times it feels rehearsed. Then she paused. "I'm not seeing any outstanding balance," she said slowly. I laughed nervously. "That can't be right. According to our records, this account was settled shortly after your husband's death." My mouth went dry. "That's not possible," I said. "I've been transferring $500 every month." She asked where I had been sending the money. I gave her the account details. Her tone changed, not alarmed, but concerned. "That account isn't associated with us," she said. It never was. The room felt like it tilted. I ended the call in a daze and sat there staring at the wall, my thoughts racing. If it wasn't going to them, then where had my money been going? 10 years. 120 months. $60,000. I pulled up my banking history with shaking hands. Every transfer. Same. Destination. Same reference line. I had never questioned it. Never verified it. Same destination. Same reference line. I had never questioned it. Never verified it. Never followed up. Because I trusted the process. Because I trusted the people who told me this was necessary. Because I trusted that no one would let me do this if it wasn't right. As the realization settled in, grief resurfaced, but this time it wasn't quiet or familiar. This grief was sharp. Disorienting. Mixed with something else I hadn't expected. Betrayal. I wasn't just mourning my husband anymore. I was mourning 10 years of my life. 10 years of sacrifice made under an assumption that suddenly felt constructed. I needed answers. And the truth I was about to uncover would force me to question not just where my money went, but who I had been trusting all along. The night after that phone call, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the woman's words over and over again. That account isn't associated with us. It never was. Every time the sentence repeated in my head, my chest tightened a little more. I kept reaching for my phone, opening my banking app, scrolling through 10 years of transactions like I might suddenly see something different. But the numbers didn't change. $500. Every month. Same account. Same reference. It was all there, cold, undeniable proof that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-time mistake. This was a decade-long routine built on something false. By morning, shock had given way to determination. I needed to know how this started. I dug through old boxes I hadn't touched since the move after my husband's funeral. Paperwork, condolence cards, legal documents, folders labeled in his handwriting. My hands shook as I sorted through them, half expecting to find some explanation tucked between receipts and statements. That's when I found it. An old email printout, yellowed at the edges, dated just 2 weeks after his death. It explained the outstanding obligations and included the account information where payments should be sent. I remembered that email. At the time, it had felt like a lifeline, someone telling me exactly what to do when I felt incapable of deciding anything myself. I stared at the sender's name. It wasn't a bank. It wasn't a creditor. It was someone I knew. My stomach dropped. I sat back on the floor, the paper trembling in my hands, as memory rushed in all at once. The conversations. The reassurance. The way they'd said, "Don't worry, I'll help you handle this." Help. That word felt bitter now. I called my bank next. Not to dispute anything yet, just to ask questions. The representative was calm, methodical, and far more alarmed than I expected when I explained the situation. "You've been sending this money voluntarily," she said carefully. "Which means stopping it is simple. Recovering it may not be." That sentence hit hard. I asked her to walk me through every detail tied to that account, when it was first added, from which device, whether it had ever been updated or flagged. As she spoke, a picture formed that made my skin prickle. This wasn't accidental. The account had been added manually. The instructions were specific. The timing, right after the funeral, was precise. Someone had taken advantage of my grief. I ended the call and sat there in silence, feeling foolish and furious all at once. How had I not seen it? How had I let this go on for so long? And then a more painful question surfaced. Who else knew? Over the next few days, I started asking careful questions. Not accusations. Just curiosity, disguised as closure. Do you remember how I started paying those debts? Do you recall who helped me set everything up? Was there ever a final statement showing what was owed? The answers were vague. Inconsistent. Avoidant. Some people didn't remember. Others said they assumed it had been handled. A few looked uncomfortable, like they were hearing the story for the first time, but not surprised by it. That hurt more than I expected. Because it meant my sacrifice hadn't been invisible. It had been convenient. One afternoon, I finally confronted the person whose name was on that email. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply asked, Why did you tell me my husband had debts that needed to be paid? There was a pause, just long enough. Then came the justifications. They said they were helping me manage things. They said the money was being used responsibly. They said I never asked questions. They said I seemed okay with it. I listened without interrupting, each explanation landing heavier than the last. When they finished, I said quietly, "You let me believe this was my responsibility. For 10 years. They didn't deny it. Instead, they said something that changed how I saw everything. You needed something to focus on, they replied. I thought it gave you purpose. Purpose. I ended the conversation after that. Not because I had nothing more to say, but because I finally understood something crucial. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. About someone deciding what was best for me while I was too broken to argue. That night, I canceled the transfer. Watching the confirmation screen felt surreal. Like cutting a cord I hadn't realized was wrapped around my life. For the first time in a decade, the next month's budget looked different. Lighter. Open. But relief didn't come right away. Instead, grief returned in waves, grief not just for my husband, but for the years I had shaped around a lie. The opportunities I'd postponed. The freedom I'd denied myself. The version of me that had believed sacrifice was the same as love. And beneath all of that was anger. Not loud, explosive anger, but a steady, focused kind. The kind that asks hard questions. The kind that demands accountability. I started documenting everything. Emails. Bank statements. Dates. Conversations. I didn't know yet what I would do with it all, but I knew I wouldn't ignore it anymore. Because one thing had become painfully clear. If I didn't confront this fully, I would carry it for the rest of my life, just like I had carried that monthly payment. And I was done carrying things that were never mine to begin with. In the days that followed, my life became a strange mix of normal routines and quiet investigation. On the surface, nothing had changed. I still woke up early. I still made my coffee the same way. I still answered messages, ran errands, smiled politely when needed. But underneath all of that, something had shifted. A question followed me everywhere I went. How much of my life had been shaped by a lie I never consented to? I began to notice things I had ignored for years. The vacations I never took because money was tight. The repairs I postponed. The invitations I declined. The constant guilt I felt whenever I spent anything on myself. All of it traced back to one belief: I owed something. That belief had governed my decisions like an invisible rulebook. And now that rulebook had been ripped away. I booked a consultation with a lawyer, not because I was ready to take action, but because I needed clarity. I walked into that office with a folder thick with documents and a heart that felt heavier than it had at my husband's funeral. The lawyer listened quietly as I explained everything. 10 years. Monthly payments. No legitimate creditor. A trusted person involved. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said something I wasn't prepared for. You're not stupid, she said firmly. You were vulnerable. There's a difference. I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear that until my eyes filled with tears. She explained my options carefully. What could be pursued legally? What would be difficult to prove? What might never be recovered? There were no guarantees. No dramatic promises of justice. Just reality. But one thing was clear. What happened to me wasn't normal. And it wasn't okay. As I left her office, I felt something unexpected, not relief, but strength. Quiet, steady strength. The kind that doesn't rush. The kind that builds. That evening, I sat alone at my dining table and did something I had avoided for a decade. I opened a notebook and wrote down. Boundaries began to form naturally. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped justifying my choices. When questions came, I answered simply, or not at all. Some people pulled away. Others acted offended. A few tried to guilt me, reminding me of everything they'd done for me. But something surprising happened too. A couple of people apologized. Quietly. Awkwardly. Imperfectly. And I realized something important: accountability reveals character. Always. I didn't know yet what justice would look like in the long term. I didn't know whether I would ever recover what I lost. But I knew this. The cycle was broken. For 10 years, my grief had been managed by someone else's agenda. Now, for the first time, it belonged to me again. And that changed everything. Because once you stop paying for lies, you start investing in truth. The weeks after that confrontation felt heavier than I expected, not because I regretted what I'd done, but because I was finally feeling everything I had postponed for 10 years. Grief doesn't disappear when someone dies. Sometimes it just waits. For years, my grief had been neatly organized around responsibility. As long as I was handling things, I didn't have to sit with the deeper questions. I didn't have to ask whether my marriage had been built on full honesty. I didn't have to confront how alone I had really been after my husband died. Now, without the monthly payment anchoring my routine, those questions had space to breathe. And they were loud. I started remembering moments from the past with a new lens. Conversations that once felt reassuring now sounded rehearsed. Statements like, "Don't worry, this is the least you can do for him," echoed differently. Back then, they felt like guidance. Now, they felt like pressure. One memory, in particular, wouldn't leave me alone. It was about a year after my husband passed. I had hesitated before sending one of the early payments. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the confirmation screen, my hands shaking slightly. I had asked, almost timidly, if the amount could be reduced for a while. The answer had been immediate. It wouldn't be right, I was told. You know how much this matters. I had clicked send without another word. That version of me felt so far away now, yet heartbreakingly close. As these memories surfaced, something else began to change: my relationships. People who were used to my compliance struggled with my silence. They didn't know how to interact with me when I stopped over-explaining. When I declined requests without adding an apology, it made them uncomfortable. And discomfort, I learned, makes people reveal themselves. One afternoon, I received a message that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't kind either. It implied that I had abandoned responsibilities and disrespected the past. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally understood something crucial: responding would only pull me back into a story I was done narrating. That night, I sat alone in my living room and did something radical. I allowed myself to feel angry. Not explosive anger. Not revenge-fueled anger. But clear, grounded anger. The kind that says, "This crossed a line." I had been taught, subtly, repeatedly, that anger made me ungrateful. That it made me difficult. That it meant I was failing at being understanding. But anger, I realized, was simply grief's bodyguard. It had shown up late, but it had shown up for a reason. Around this time, I began therapy. Not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to understand how I had been so easily convinced to carry a burden that wasn't mine. In one session, my therapist asked a question that stopped me cold. What did paying those debts give you? At first, I didn't understand. Then it hit me. It gave me purpose. It gave me a sense of connection to my husband. It gave me a way to stay loyal, even after he was gone. Letting go of the payments didn't just mean letting go of a lie. It meant letting go of the last role I had in my marriage. That realization hurt more than the financial betrayal ever could. I wasn't just mourning money. I was mourning identity. Slowly, painfully, I began redefining myself without that obligation. I explored things I had always postponed. I took a short trip, my first in years. I replaced something in my home that had been broken forever because it wasn't necessary. Each small choice felt rebellious and freeing. But not everyone celebrated my growth. There was one final conversation, one I had avoided but couldn't escape forever. It happened over the phone, late in the evening. The tone was careful at first, almost gentle. Then it shifted. They said I was being selfish. They said I was rewriting history. They said I was dishonoring my husband's memory. That's when I finally spoke without fear. My husband's memory doesn't belong to you, I said calmly. And neither does my future. The line went quiet. Then it ended. I sat there, phone in hand, heart racing, not with regret, but with relief. Because for the first time, I wasn't defending myself. I was choosing myself. In the days that followed, the fallout settled. Some connections faded permanently. Others adjusted. Life didn't collapse. The world didn't punish me for setting boundaries. Instead, it expanded. I began planning again, not around guilt, but around possibility. I reworked my finances. I dreamed forward instead of backward. And one quiet morning, while sipping coffee by the window, it finally occurred to me. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. Not on obligation. Not on silence. But on truth. And that truth, however painful, had given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Control. By the time I reached this stage, something inside me had settled. Not healed completely. Not forgotten. But steadied. The chaos that followed my decision had burned itself out. The messages stopped coming. The passive-aggressive comments faded. What remained was quieter, but more honest. Silence, I learned, can be revealing. In that silence, I started noticing how much energy I suddenly had. Energy that used to be spent worrying, justifying, explaining. Energy that had been quietly drained month after month, year after year. I hadn't just been paying money. I had been paying attention. I had been paying emotional labor. I had been paying my peace. And now, for the first time, all of that stayed with me. One afternoon, I sat down and did something symbolic. I gathered every document related to those payments, bank statements, notes, reminders, old messages, and placed them in a single box. I didn't shred them. I didn't throw them away. I closed the lid. Not because I wanted to erase what happened, but because I no longer needed to live inside it. That box went into a closet I rarely opened. And somehow, knowing it was there, but not in front of me, felt right. Around this time, people began treating me differently. Not kinder. Not harsher. Just, more carefully. When you stop being predictable, people don't know where to place you anymore. They hesitate. They watch. They adjust. And I liked that. I liked not being immediately available. Not being the solution. Not being the emotional safety net. For years, I had been the reliable one. The one who handled discomfort so others didn't have to. The one who absorbed tension and smoothed things over. Now, when discomfort showed up, I let it sit. And surprisingly, it didn't destroy relationships the way I had been warned it would. Some relationships did end, but they had been transactional long before I noticed. Others transformed. One conversation stands out clearly. A family member, someone who had benefited quietly from my compliance, sat across from me and said, "You seem different." I smiled and replied, "I am." They hesitated, then said, "I guess I never realized how much you carried." That wasn't an apology. But it was acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's the beginning of accountability. That night, alone at home, I thought about forgiveness. Not the kind people pressure you into, the performative kind. But the internal kind. The kind that frees you without excusing harm. I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't need to forgive anyone yet. And that was okay. Forgiveness, I decided, wasn't a requirement for peace. understanding was. And I understood now, clearly, how grief, loyalty, and manipulation had tangled together in my life. That clarity was enough. Months passed. Financially, things stabilized faster than I expected. Without the monthly drain, my savings grew. I invested differently. I planned differently. The future no longer felt like something I had to survive, it felt like something I could design. Emotionally, the change was deeper. I stopped introducing myself through loss. I stopped framing my identity around what I had endured. I was no longer the widow who carried everything. I was just me. One evening, while organizing old photos, I came across a picture of my husband. I sat with it for a long time. There was sadness, yes. But there was also honesty. I loved him. I missed him. And I could finally admit, without guilt, that his choices were not my responsibility. That realization didn't diminish my love for him. It humanized it. Love doesn't mean lifelong punishment. Loyalty doesn't mean self-destruction. And grief doesn't require eternal sacrifice. I wish someone had told me that earlier. But maybe I needed to learn it the hard way, to truly believe it. Toward the end of that year, something unexpected happened. I received a message. Short. Careful. Direct. It didn't ask for money. It didn't demand forgiveness. It didn't rewrite the past. It simply said, I know. Now what I should have admitted back then. I'm sorry. I read it several times. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was calculating, but because I was listening to myself. Did I want closure? Did I want distance? Did I want conversation? In the end, I chose simplicity. I appreciate the acknowledgement, I replied. I'm focusing on moving forward. That was all. No reopening wounds. No moral victory speech. No emotional labor. Just truth. And that felt like growth. As the year closed, I reflected on how far I had come, from a woman bound by obligation to someone grounded in choice. The biggest lesson wasn't about money. It was about consent. I had never consented to carry that burden forever. I had never agreed to silence myself. I had never chosen invisibility. Those things had happened slowly, through expectation, pressure, and grief. Undoing them took courage. And patience. And compassion, for myself most of all. Now, when I think about the woman I used to be, the one who clicked transfer every month without question, I don't feel shame. I feel tenderness. She did the best she could with the information she had. But I'm no longer her. I'm someone who knows this. You can honor the past without being trapped in it. You can love deeply without abandoning yourself. And you can stop paying for debts, emotional or financial, that were never yours to begin with. And in that knowing, I finally found peace that didn't cost me anything at all.
For more inspiring and heart-touching stories like this, please subscribe to our channel.